Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. The United States launched an airstrike on the Shayrat air base in Syria last night, following the alleged chemical attacks in Idlib ordered by the Assad government. Tonight, our first guest via Skype is Mr. Ömer Taşpınar. He's a Turkey expert at the Brookings Institute. Welcome, Mr. Taşpınar. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks for having me. I can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Taşpınar. So you're currently in Brussels for the meeting of NATO foreign ministers. So first of all, my question to you is, could you explain to us how yesterday's airstrikes on the Shayrat base are taken? How are they received in Brussels at the moment?
Well, there was an EU foreign ministers meeting, and then the NATO summit had happened earlier on. But overall, the reaction is quite positive, both within NATO and the European Union, because there was a sense that the Obama administration was not really willing to act militarily in Syria, and that was emboldening the Syrian regime. Now that the Trump administration decided to strike, this gives more credibility to the Western camp, and there is a hope that the U.S. administration will be more active, not just in terms of engaging militarily the conflict, but that this could also create some momentum for the Geneva process that had been overtaken by the Astana process under the Russian leadership. So overall, my impression is that this is a good day for the transatlantic coalition, and that the EU foreign ministers are overall happy, and the same goes for NATO.
Thank you. My second question is about an op-ed that you published today on the Turkish language news platform T24. So in this piece, you wrote that, actually you suggested that Obama's previous image of the wise philosopher is now replaced with the new sheriff in town attitude of Donald Trump. And you also suggested that this could bear surprises for the future of Turkey-US relations. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Sure. Let me start with the message that Trump is sending to the world. First of all, no one expected the Trump administration to strike Syria, to strike the regime, because the Trump administration came to power arguing that their top priority is the fight against the Islamic State and jihadist terrorism. By now acting against the Syrian regime, this shows that the Trump administration is quite unpredictable. Apparently, Trump, having seen the images of kids, babies who have been killed by the chemical attack, had an epiphany, and he changed his mind on what to do about Syria. And the attack in that sense indicates that instead of the Obama administration that would basically spend hours, weeks, sometimes months deliberating whether to strike or not, the Trump administration is the opposite. They act quickly, they take their decision, and they try to have basically a sense of clarity in their action. This message is also partly to, in my opinion, East Asia, because there's a summit right now in Washington between the Chinese leader and Trump. They're actually in Florida at the residence of President Trump, and Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, is visiting the United States. So the message is partly to China, but mostly also to North Korea. North Korea, as you know, has been sending missiles and has a nuclear program and has nuclear weapons. And this message is partly to North Korea in the sense that if North Korea continues its activities, there could also be a unilateral strike. And in that sense, Trump is sending a strong message to North Korea. Another dimension of the message is to Iran. Iran is very active in Syria, and Iran has a nuclear deal with the United States. So part of the message is to Iran as well, in terms of the need for Iran to act according to the international norms agreed in the agreement about the nuclear plan. And finally, there is also a message to Washington, D.C. Trump had a very rough time domestically because of the health care program that failed in Congress. Right now, he's basically strengthening his hand domestically, sending a message to the domestic audiences that he's a much more decisive leader than Obama, and that if necessary, he can do certain things against Russian interests in Syria. And there was a sense that Trump was beholden to Russian interests because of Russian interference in the U.S. elections and Russian support for Trump. By striking the regime, Trump is basically sending a message to Russia clearly saying that, if necessary, he will not act according to Russian interests. So in that sense, he's basically killing many birds with one stone.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Taşpınar. We'll keep you on the line and continue with the next news video, and we'll continue our conversation afterwards.
Okay.
Turkey's relations with NATO remain tense following talks of a possible defense deal between Ankara and Moscow.
The relations between Turkey and NATO have been tense since Turkey's July 15th coup attempt and the increasing cooperation between Russia and Turkey in Syria. A further issue which could mend ties between Ankara and Brussels is a potential defense deal between Russia and Turkey. In 2013, Turkey gave a tender to a Chinese company for missile defense systems procurement in order to appease its long-held desire to have a long-range missile defense system of its own. Yet, Ankara had to scrap the $3.4 billion deal due to heavy pressure from NATO in 2015. Now, Turkey considers buying advanced S-400 air and missile defense systems from the Russian Federation. The decision is expected to draw a sharp reaction from NATO. However, this time Turkey is likely to stand firm against pressures coming from Brussels. Defense Minister Fikri Işık made the following statement: "I believe that NATO will understand Turkey's decision and will empathize," adding that Turkey might use these non-NATO systems without integration to NATO missile defense infrastructure. After the failed coup attempt of July 15th, Turkey has fired several senior military officials serving at NATO in Europe and the US, including some of the best-trained officials in the armed forces. Although they represent a small fraction of the comprehensive purge initiated by the government in the aftermath of the coup attempt, these dismissals raised questions about Turkey's strategy regarding its relations with the alliance.
Mr. Taşpınar, so as we've just heard in the previous news clip, Turkey is considering right now buying advanced S-400 air and missile defense systems from Russia. And this time Turkey is expected to stand firm against NATO pressures. So do you think this is likely? And if so, what kind of problems could this bring about?
Well, the impression I got from NATO officials that I was communicating during this in Brussels is that they believe this will turn out just like last time when Turkey tried to buy Chinese missile defense. So there is a hope in NATO, among NATO members, and especially among the United States officers that I talked to, that Turkey is trying to bargain for a better deal from the West. If Turkey goes ahead and buys S-400s from Russia, this will certainly pose a major problem for the transatlantic alliance. The S-400s will not be interoperable with the NATO equipment, and this will send a very strong message to the West that Turkey is realigning its positions in security affairs from a pro-Western position to a more Eurasianist outlook. And I have to underline that there's a certain concern in NATO that most of the pro-Western generals, pro-Western military officers have been purged in the aftermath of the failed coup in Turkey, and that the remaining voices within Turkey, both in the security but also political establishment, are not very keen on continuing good relations with the United States. Now, this is not happening in a vacuum. The United States basically is supporting Kurdish groups in Syria that are associated with the PYD, and this is a major problem in Turkish-American relations because, as you know, Turkey considers the PYD as part of the PKK and as a terrorist organization. So there's already significant tension in Turkish-American relations because of the Kurdish conflict, the Kurdish dimension of the conflict in Syria, and of course the presence of Fethullah Gülen, whose extradition remains very distant, according to many people that I talked to in Washington. So on top of these major problems, if Turkey decides to buy S-400s, this will really create, in my opinion, a sense of alarm bordering on panic in the Western alliance, and this is why they are watching Turkey's moves very carefully.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taşpınar.
Thank you. Pleasure.
The indictment into daily Cumhuriyet columnists and executives was completed on Tuesday, 5 months after the investigation was launched.
The indictment into Daily Cumhuriyet was completed and sent to the Istanbul 27th have a panel court on April 4th, nearly 5 months after the investigation was launched. The prosecutors are seeking up to 43 years in prison for journalists and executives on charge of aiding an armed terrorist organization without being members of it and membership of terrorist organizations. The indictment stated that Cumhuriyet exceeded the limits of free expression by promoting the acts of terrorist organizations. It is further stated in the 324-page document that Cumhuriyet has been seized and strayed from the initial aims of its establishment. Cumhuriyet started an intense perception operation targeting the government and the president through asymmetric war methods. It became a defender and protector of outlawed terrorist organizations such as Gülenist Terrorist Organization, the Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK, and the Revolutionary People's Liberation Party Front DHKPC. Together with Can Dündar, the former editor-in-chief of the newspaper, the indictment names 19 other journalists, of whom 12 have already been detained for 5 months, including well-known columnists Kadri Gürsel and Aydın Engin, and reporter Ahmet Şık, who was previously imprisoned for a year in the Oda TV case for the publication of his critical book on the Fethullah Gülen movement. The indictment reportedly accuses the suspects for providing a basis for illegal politics and legitimizing the acts of terrorist groups based on publications, articles, and social media posts, along with allegations that columnists had been in contact with users of Baylak, an instant messaging application used by Gülenists. Moreover, the statements regarding the seizing of the newspaper were based on witness accounts and testimonies of Gülenist confessors, pro-AKP columnists, former Cumhuriyet Foundation executives, and former Cumhuriyet reporters. There are lots of organizations in Turkey and we are being blamed for helping all of them, Can Dündar said shortly after the accusations. Kadri Gürsel, who was accused of being in contact with 92 Baylak users, refused the allegations, adding that the indictment does not reveal the details of this contact. It may be due to the hundreds of SMS messages which I didn't reply to, or due to the many retweets made by Baylak users. The nature of this contact must be disclosed by the court. If the indictment is approved by the court, the date of the first hearing of the case will be announced.
21 suspects who were put on trial for their alleged links to the Gülen movement, including journalists, writers, and public figures, were released on Friday. The suspects, however, were detained again in the following hours.
A new investigation was opened on April 1st, extending the ongoing detentions of the journalists and writers, including singer Atilla Taş, accused of being affiliated with the Gülenist terrorist organization, who were to be released following the ruling of Judge İbrahim Loğazdağ on March 31st. In early 2017, the prosecutors demanded up to 10 years in prison for the journalists and writers who were detained and later arrested under the Operation Against the Media Organization of Gülenist Terrorist Organization. The suspects were put on trial on the investigations launched following the July 15 coup attempt. On Friday, 21 of the 29 journalists and writers, including singer Atilla Taş, were released by the ruling of Judge İbrahim Loğazdağ. Loğazdağ ruled the other suspects to remain under arrest as not all necessary evidence was collected. However, hours later, Istanbul Chief Prosecutor's Office opened a new investigation on the suspects who were to be released. According to the state-led Anadolu Agency, the new investigation, which extends their ongoing detention, accuses the suspects of attempting to destroy the Turkish government and the constitutional order. As a result, neither of the suspects for whom the release decision was made could be released. The suspects will remain under detention for up to 7 days before being charged. On the other hand, following the new investigation, the Istanbul 25th Heavy Panel Court judges who had ruled for the release of 21 journalists and writers have been suspended from duty by the Supreme Board of Judges and Prosecutors. These releases were intentional, contrary to law, and doesn't comply with the facts, said Mehmet Yılmaz, the Supreme Board of Judges and Prosecutors Deputy Chair. Meanwhile, Minister of Justice Bekir Bozdağ noted that the suspensions are not discharges. The final decision will be made after the ongoing investigation is completed. The next trial of the case will be held on April 27.
Iraq's Kurds have agreed to hold a referendum on independence this year. Leaders of the two leading parties have met with President Masoud Barzani to discuss further details.
The major political parties in the Iraqi Kurdistan have agreed to hold a referendum for independence in 2017. The two main ruling parties met on Sunday with Masoud Barzani, the president of the Iraqi Kurdistan regional government, to discuss the timing and mechanism of the referendum. A popular vote for independence has been long aspired by the Iraqi Kurds, who are estimated to make up around 20% of the Iraqi population. In a joint statement, Kurdish leaders described the vote as a natural right of the nation of Kurdistan to decide on its political and administrative path as an entity of an independent state. The 2005 Iraqi constitution was drafted and approved after the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, and it recognizes an autonomous Kurdistan region in the north of the country. Since then, the Iraqi Kurds have often mentioned the prospects of declaring independence from the Baghdad government. In 2005, before the Iraqi constitution came into force, Kurds held an informal referendum and 98% of the population voted for separating from the Iraqi government. Yet, the result of the vote was inconsequential. In July 2014, President Barzani declared that Iraqi Kurds would hold a referendum to vote on independence with the following words: "I have said many times that independence is a natural right of the people of Kurdistan," adding that world leaders had come to the conclusion that an era of Sykes-Picot was over. Yet, as ISIS forces came dangerously close to the Kurdish capital of Erbil in August 2014, the vote was put on hold, and Baghdad and Erbil decided to work together to defeat ISIS. In February, Masoud Barzani declared once again that the time had arrived for the people of Kurdistan to make a decision on their future through popular vote. Independence has long been the centerpiece of Kurdish ambitions, the fourth largest ethnic group in the Middle East. Besides the short-lived state of the Republic of Mahabad, founded as a Kurdish state during the Soviet invasion of Iran in 1941, Kurds have been a nation without state during the modern history of the Middle East, partitioned in 4 neighboring countries: Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. The Iraqi Kurds' aspiration for independence is not welcomed by the neighboring governments, who are concerned that the pursuit of a similar goal may occur within their own Kurdish minorities.
We interviewed Berkin Elvan's parents this week. Berkin Elvan was shot and killed by a gas canister during the Gezi protests in 2013.
The first hearing of the Berkin Elvan trial was held on Thursday. Berkin Elvan, who was shot with a gas canister during the Gezi protests in 2013, suffered from brain hemorrhage until he died after nearly a year in a coma. Elvan was 15 when he died. The investigation of the case was completed on December 7, 2016, approximately 3 years after Elvan's death. The first hearing of the trial was held on Thursday. Berkin's parents, Gülsüm and Sami Elvan, commented on the trial for Medyascope.
Berkin Elvan davası aynı zamanda.
The Berkin Elvan case is also the case of all the children that have been murdered, abused, and exposed to violence in Turkey. If we are able to create a pressure and win the case, these children will also be saved. Then it will be the case of all of these children as well. There are lots of children who are abused or exposed to violence, and they're our future. This case is theirs too.
Tek söylemek istediğim mücadele.
There is only one thing I would like to say. Our struggle is the struggle of Turkish children. Here, I would like to give a shout out to everybody. Yes, even if Berkin is speculated by certain people to be other things which he is not, I underline that Berkin was not like how these people think of him. We will prove everything. We will demonstrate that the allegations are unfounded. We will show that the accusations about the iron ball and slingshot are fraudulent. We think that this whole thing is a setup, because we know who are behind this. Our child was pure and innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't take anybody's life or steal anything. That's why I want Turkey and the world to embrace this case. I give a shout out to everybody for being sensitive and following this case.
Our second guest via Skype tonight is Mr. Barın Kayaoğlu. He's an assistant professor of world history at the American University of Iraq in Süleymaniye and a writer and editor for the independent news website Al Monitor. Welcome, Mr. Kayaoğlu. Can you hear me?
I can hear you quite well. Hello, Aydın Hanım.
Thank you. So, Mr. Kayaoğlu, the Turkish Foreign Minister Davutoğlu had an interesting statement earlier in the week, saying that raising the Kurdish flag in Kirkuk was a trap for Barzani. First of all, how do you evaluate this statement?
I've actually heard it from other people here in Süleymaniye telling me that this was initially the hoisting of the Kurdish flag. The decision to hoist the Kurdish flag along with the flag of Iraq in the province of Kirkuk after the vote in the Kirkuk Provincial Council was an attempt on the part of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan to establish itself in a stronger position against Mr. Barzani's KDP. I can tell you that I have heard that argument. It's not impossible, partly because Mr. Barzani's KDP holds Duhok and Erbil as the major cities of Iraqi Kurdistan, whereas Kirkuk for years was ruled by Governor Necmettin Kerim, who himself is a PUK person, the PUK, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan Party, Mr. Jalal Talabani's party, and without Kirkuk, without having access to Kirkuk, of course, it would have been very hard for PUK to sustain itself. Of course, it would also be misleading to think of it as simply an intra-Kurdish rivalry, because without Kirkuk, any prospective independent Kurdistan would not be economically or even geographically viable.
Thank you. And as we've just watched in one of the previous news clips, the news of the Iraqi Kurds referendum decision wasn't taken very well by the Turkish government for very obvious reasons.
No.
So how do you think the decision on this independence referendum what kind of an effect do you think this will have on the future of the relations between Barzani and the Turkish government, or let's just say for the future of the dynamics of the wider region?
I'll tackle your question in two parts. One, with respect to Turkish-Kurdish relations and Mr. Barzani's relations with Ankara. I would say that in the short term, it won't affect the relations too well for obvious reasons. But I do also suspect that much of Ankara's response since last week, the previous week, to the Kirkuk Provincial Council's decision, I feel that much of Ankara's reaction was a result of the upcoming presidential referendum in Turkey. For our viewers, I think it's important to remind them that the Nationalist Action Party chairman, Devlet Bahçeli, has been on the side of President Erdogan, supporting the passage of the referendum because of calculations that only he knows. But Mr. Erdogan, President Erdogan knows that without Mr. Bahçeli's support, that it would be nigh on impossible for him to get his long time wish of establishing a presidential system in Turkey. And Mr. Bahçeli also has been vehemently against as what he says, the Kurdification of Kirkuk. And he has at times tried to corner the ruling AKP in order to force their hands to say that, well, we're against the hoisting of the Kurdish flag in Kirkuk, and also, therefore, in the medium to long term, the formation of an independent Kurdistan. I see much of the Turkish government's response to Mr. Barzani's need as a factor in as a result of its domestic politics. With respect to the regional implications of an independent Kurdistan, I'm not quite sure. Much of it, of course, rides on what sort of a deal that Erbil, the capital of the Kurdistan regional government, and the federal government in Baghdad would actually strike. What sort of an agreement would they come to? Would Kirkuk, would Erbil press for some sort of expanded autonomy, an increase in the Kurdistan region's share from Iraq's oil wealth, other things, and what would Baghdad give? What would Baghdad give to Erbil in return? Mm-hmm. Much of it rides on that.
Thank you. Mr. Kayaoğlu, we'll keep you on the line. We'll see a video on the city of Kirkuk, and then we'll continue our conversation after that video. The city of Kirkuk is once again under the spotlight following the Iraqi Kurds' decision to hold an independence referendum. Our next news video will give a brief overview of the important developments involving the city within the last decades.
The oil-rich northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk is a diverse and multilingual town with various ethnic groups including the Arabs, Kurds, Turkmens, Assyrians and Armenians. With the Iraqi Kurdistan regional government now taking steps to annex the city, the long-held discussions on its governance and status are sparking once again. Following the invasion of Iraq, thousands of previously displaced Kurds have been returning to Kirkuk and other Arabized regions to reclaim the towns. This power struggle between the ethnic groups has been going on for some time. A turning point in the history of Kirkuk was a convention held in May 2003 to elect the first city council under the supervision of the Coalition Provisional Authority. Each of the city's four major ethnic groups, namely the Kurds, Arabs, Assyrians and Turkmen, were invited to select 6 delegates to sit on the city council. An additional 6 members were selected from 144 delegates to represent independent groups such as the teachers, lawyers, religious leaders and artists. In June 2005, with the participation of the widest range of communities in the province, Kirkuk elected its first provincial council. The Kurds won 26 of the 41 seats. The Arab and Turkmen members withdrew from the council in November 2016, claiming that the Kurdish majority had excluded them from the decision-making and governance. They returned in December 2007 after a new power-sharing deal was agreed. A fresh controversy arose following a recent unilateral decision taken by the Kurds, disputed not only by the other ethnic groups but also by Ankara and Baghdad. The Provincial Council voted on April 4 to hold a referendum regarding the annexation of the city by the Kurdistan Regional Government. The meeting was convened by 26 Kurdish council members, with 9 Turkmen and 6 Arab members boycotting in protest. Speaking on behalf of the regional government after the meeting, Jalal Talabani declared that they will be sending their referendum request to the Iraqi central government. The cities of Mosul and Kirkuk have a profound historical and strategic significance to Turkey. Because of their Turkmen populations, the two cities were included in the national frontiers declared in the last term of the Ottoman Parliament in January 1920. The Turkish Republic considers these parliamentary decisions, collectively known as Misak-ı Milli, or the National Oath, as the basis of Turkey's foundation. Various Turkish politicians have occasionally reiterated claims over Mosul and Kirkuk since then. Ankara has now once again reacted to the referendum decision for Kirkuk in bold tone. On Tuesday, President Erdogan threatened to strain ties with the Kurdistan region over the status of Kirkuk province being claimed by the Kurds. I call on the Iraqi Kurdish regional administration to correct the wrong step at once, Erdogan added. We never abide by the nonsense. Kirkuk belongs to Kurds. Kirkuk belongs to all, whoever lives there, the Turkmen, the Arabs and the Kurds, if there are any, Erdogan added.
So, Mr. Kayaoğlu, could you perhaps briefly talk about the different positions held by the different ethnic groups in the city of Kirkuk about the special status of this city to begin with?
After the Kirkuk Provincial Council decision on the Kurdish flag, on hoisting the Kurdish flag next to the Iraqi flag, Arab and Turkmen representatives in the Provincial Council, during the vote, primarily Arab and Turkmen members seemed opposed and voted against the measure, although they ultimately lost because Kurds have a majority in the Provincial Council. And that vote basically reflects the positions of the different ethnic groups in Kirkuk. On the one hand, you have the Turkmens and the Arabs who are somewhat uneasy about Kirkuk being part of Iraqi Kurdistan, officially being part of Iraqi Kurdistan. And on the other hand, you have the Kurds who are probably a majority in the province, not necessarily in the city of Kirkuk itself, who want Kirkuk to be part of Kurdistan and possibly that of eventually that part of an independent Kurdistan. As for if you want me to expand the question to bring in other groups such as Governor Karim, who of course has tried to assuage the worries of Iraqi Turkmens and Iraqi Arabs living in Kirkuk. That's possible. I also would like to mention, actually, if I may, that Prime Minister Abadi has been, on the one hand, both skeptical towards this measure, against this measure of Kirkuk officially becoming part of Kurdistan, but he's actually playing a much smarter game. I think he has emphasized how in the past 2-3 years, with the rise of ISIS, with the rise of Daesh, Iraqi forces and Peshmerga forces have shed blood together, and how two military groups that hitherto were completely separate, it was unthinkable that they could ever fight shoulder to shoulder, have now been fighting together, and that has been Prime Minister Abadi's emphasis. On the Turkmen side, perhaps to also to go into a little bit of detail with the Turkmens. For example, immediately in the aftermath of the Kirkuk Provincial Council's decision, he was the spokesman of the Iraqi Turkmen Front, Mr. Ali Mahdi, who said, we don't really care about ourselves, we don't really care about our lives, but we can die, but we want Turkey and Azerbaijan to live. He actually used a very dramatic rhetoric in order to emphasize the importance of Kirkuk to its to the big Turkic states in the region, Azerbaijan and Turkey. So, in a nutshell, that's basically the different parties' approach to the Kirkuk issue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And my final question to you will be, how do you think Turkey's outlook on the Iraqi Kurdistan will affect its future stance on Syria?
Thank you for that. Turkey sees the Kurdistan issue as the Kurdish and Kurdistan issue very much in tandem with its PKK or terrorism or security problem emanating from Syria and Iraq. I would say that, without taking too much of your time, I would say that the situation in northern Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan would very much affect Ankara's views on Syria, and it runs the risk of undermining the generally good relations between Iraqi Kurdistan and Turkey. That if this independence referendum goes forward and it worsens, and in parallel, the security situation in Turkey worsens. PKK continues to stage attacks against the Turkish government forces, possibly Turkish civilians. Then that would worsen Ankara's approach both to Iraqi Kurdistan, but also the Syrian war.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kayaoğlu, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. The 36th Istanbul Film Festival, organized by the Istanbul Culture and Arts Foundation, also known as IKSV, has begun. Our friends Elif Akbıyık and Semih Esmer interviewed the festival's director at the opening reception.
This year's Cinema Honorary Awards will be presented to the actress Selma Güneri, actor Macit Koper, cinematographer Çetin Tunca, and director and scriptwriter Barış Pirasan. We wanted to award Mithat Alam too, but unfortunately Alam recently passed away. We will present 5 honorary awards this year, including one for Ian McKellen, who is the honorary guest of the festival. We will screen his movie Richard III. McKellen is known for his role in The Lord of the Rings, but he is a very important Shakespeare actor as well. We have the traditional national and international Golden Tulip competitions. We are extremely satisfied with our selection for the international competition. Last year, we changed the theme of the international competition to New Perspectives in Cinema. At the international competition, 13 movies will be competing to receive the Golden Tulip, and Kazım Öz's movie Zer represents Turkey. Regarding my suggestions, I cannot suggest a specific movie from the national competition. They are all our movies, they are all good. For the international competition, for thriller lovers, I suggest Animals. For animation lovers, The Girl Without Hands, adapted from a story by the Grimm brothers. It's a very naive and different animation movie. For those who like comedy, I can suggest In Between. I suggest everyone to pay special attention to the international competition.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul this week.
Telefon Tel Aviv, the American Idea, ambient techno and glitch project, will be at Zorlu Performing Arts Center studio on April 8th at 10 p.m. Formed by Charles Cooper and Joshua Eustis in 1999, Telefon Tel Aviv released its debut album Fahrenheit Fair Enough in 2021. Besides their own work, they contributed with samples to the synthetic drums to database of native instruments. The German technology company that designs software and hardware for music production and DJing. The most comprehensive photography exhibition of Turkey, Photo Digital, brings together all actors and professionals of the field between the 6th and 9th of April for the 7th time at CNR Expo, Yeşilköy Istanbul Hall No. 1. Organized every 2 years, the exhibition is the most valuable platform for newcomers in the market, offering different sales channels and new photography technologies for companies. There will be an exclusive screening of No Man's Land with the National Theatre Live at Play Salon on the 10th, 11th, 17th and 24th of April. Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart return to the West End stage in Harold Pinter's No Man's Land, staged at Wyndham's Theatre London. One summer's evening, 2 aging riders, Hurst and Spooner, meet in a Hampstead pub and continue their drinking into the night at Hurst's stately house nearby. As the pair become increasingly inebriated and their stories increasingly unbelievable, the lively conversation soon turns into a revealing power game, further complicated by the return home of two sinister younger men.
Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Bye.
Selam sana küçük ekranların büyük sevdalısı. Daha gözünü açmadan komikli video açan sen, ben, biz hepimiz. Kahvaltıda kimler var? Ağzından gökkuşağı çıkan bir kız ve ananasla dans eden bir eleman. Afiyet olsun. Telefonla koşarken dikkat et. Yola değil ya, izlediğim videoya tabii ki. Kedi videosu aç, bebek videosu aç, şebek videosu aç. Aç işte. Sadece video değil, film de izle. Katili göremedin mi? Darısı öbür filme. Bak işte filmin en romantik yeri. Biri sifonu mu çekti? Bak filmin en sürpriz yeri. Oo, dayı bu sahneyi çok beğendi. Filmin en heyecanlı yeri. Yoksa arayan sevgilin mi? Filmin en... Şarj bitti. Şimdi o telefonu yavaşça cebine koy. Kaldır kafanı. Sinemayla arana hiçbir şey girmeden beyaz perde ve sen. İstanbul Film Festivali başlıyor.
Yuvarla eskiden mağazalarda görmeye alışık olduğumuz şeffaf bağış kumbaralarının yeni ekonomiye, yeni ödeme alışkanlıklarına uygun haldir. Küsuratlarınızı yuvarlayarak bir üniversite öğrencisinin eğitimini desteklemekten, kanserli bir çocuğun tedavisine destek olmaya, nesli tükenmekte olan hayvanların korunmasından, doğal afet zedelerine destek olmaya kadar birçok alanda küsuratlarınızla büyük değişimler yaratabilirsiniz.
Sorsana eğitimde fırsat eşitliği yaratmaya çalışan bir mobil öğrenme platformu aslında. Türkiye'nin bir ucundaki öğrenciyi işte belki İstanbul'daki, İzmir'deki, Ankara'daki o eğitime rahat ulaşan öğrencilerle buluşturmaya çalışıp onları birbirine yardımlaşmasını sağlayıp bir eşitlik yaratmaya çalışıyoruz.
Biz ustamdan olarak Devrek'teki bastonu, Ödemiş'teki iğne oyasını, Eskişehir'deki lüle taşını, Antep'teki yemeniği dünyaya taşımak istiyoruz. Binlerce yıldır bu topraklarda devam eden, bizim kültürümüzün parçası olan bu zanaatları tasarım dokunuşuyla insanlara ulaştırmak istiyoruz. Ve bunu da hikayelerin gücünü kullanarak genç ve yaratıcı ekibimizle başarmak istiyoruz.
Türkiye'de çok fazla fikri olan ama uygulayamayan yaratıcı insan var. Bu tarz platformların buluşumun yaptığı gibi böyle biraz taşın altına elini koyarak sayılarını arttırması gerekiyor.
Neticede kar amacı gütmeyen yapılar olduğu için çok da fazla sektörden destek alamıyor bu tip kurumlar.
Buluşumun bize sağladığı bu fon sayesinde bundan sonra da daha çok kişiye ulaşabileceğiz.
Arkanızda bu tip büyük bir platform olduğu zaman bazı kapılar çok daha hızlı açılabiliyor. Buluşumun network sayesinde daha fazla markaya yayılma şansımız oldu.
Sadece girişimci değil, sosyal girişimci. Aslında bunu bu coğrafyada yapmak çok zor oluyor. Ama bu zorluğu buluşum gibi platformlar sayesinde biz aşabiliyoruz. Onların varlığı bize ilk olarak şunu söylüyor: yalnız değilsiniz ve doğru yoldasınız.